Hi and welcome back to my channel. This is Marla and I'm so glad that you're joining me today. We are going to do some no-fail watercoloring today. It was not the intent of this card. It actually took a twist on me really early on, but I think that the card turned out absolutely beautiful. I wanted to share it because I think it's a technique that anybody can do. So here we have the picket fence rectangle, follow the leaves rectangle wreath builder. There's some beautiful sentiments. You can pause to read them. The larger one was the one I intended on using, which says fall colors are the best colors of all. I planned on using one side of the wreath builder, and then immediately this took a turn. So because this is a larger stamp, I did put some tape on the back of my Bristol Smooth cardstock. I've placed it in my MISTI and I'm using my anti-static powder because I'm going to do some heat embossing. So I'm aligning the stamp on the right side of my card and I'm going to use my Versamark ink. I'll tap it onto the stamp and then I'll close the door to my MISTI. I'll use my little stamp tool to just make sure I get even coverage. And here's where my first fail was. I completely missed the corner. So I've added some Brutus Monroe Gilded embossing powder over the top of this because I did know that I wanted to do some gold heat embossing. I thought that that would really help these leaves to just stand out. It's an absolutely gorgeous set that can be used with both slimline, mini slimline, 5x7 cards, A2 cards, super versatile. Because I placed this in the middle of my MISTI, now I can't restamp that because I'm not going to get it in the same location. So I'll put that side away and I'm going to pull out a second one. And I am going to go with the first orientation over on the left-hand side. I'm only going to add the Versamark ink to the left side. So that middle section that you see at the bottom, I won't be inking that. And we'll do the same thing. We'll add our gold embossing powder over the top of it. And I thought that I could fix that one corner. And what my intent was to use one of those stamps and then to just bring in some leaves from the side. And then I would still be able to have the leaves all around the outside of my card and I could put my sentiment in the center. But when I stamped the leaves, I used one end of one of these stamps that has bigger leaves, and those bigger leaves ended up just looking like they didn't belong in place. So this was going to be basically a one-layer card, but I am going to have to switch gears after I do this little bit of stamping. It's something that I frequently do. I am not a card planner. I know there's a lot of people out there that plan their cards before they do their videos, and I think that's fabulous, but that's just not me. I kind of work on the fly. I have an idea and try to run with it. So now we are just going to switch things up a little bit. I'm going to trim this panel down to 4 by 5¼ inches. I don't want to have that white background. Again, this is Bristol Smooth cardstock. I'm going to be coloring with my Zig markers, and when I color with those, the Bristol Smooth works the best, but I didn't want this to be a super vibrant card. I did want to mute the colors just a little bit. I am going to be watercoloring with some jewel tone markers, and you'll see that I'm going to be mixing and matching. So right now I'm sticking with the one plan of doing the watercoloring on all of the leaves, and so I put my darkest color down, which was that maroonish red, and then I added a little bit of that pink over the top, and then I blended it out with a damp watercolor brush. When I'm doing this, one thing that I'm starting to learn, I am not a watercolor expert, but these smaller brushes, not because the area is small, but because I don't want a lot of water on my brush. These smaller brushes tend to work a little bit better because I'm not going to oversaturate the paper. I am switching gears here and sticking with some of the pinks for these leaves, and I'm not going to show you every leaf. I'm just trying to show you each of the different color combinations, and I will link the markers in the description box below. So this is more of a rosy pink that I'm adding with a different shade of red pink. And again, I just lay my darkest color down on the edges of the leaves, and then I add my lightest color lightly over top, not coloring the whole leaf. And then I add some water just to move that color, making sure that I have light areas and darker areas. So it really adds a nice variety to each of the leaves. Here we're adding a few more of the purple tones to this. So you see I have that light lavender color, and then I'm using a pink with that. That's going to give me a little bit lighter leaf. There's lots of leaves in here to watercolor, so I tried to switch up the colors, try to find purples and reds and pinks that went together. I will bring in a brown and an orange just to add a little bit more pop to the card. So here's a reddish purple, I believe, and then I'm adding some, oh no, it's a hot pink, sorry about that. It's a hot pink and a light pink. Again, so far we're staying with the purples and the reds, and the colors are just working together beautifully. If you are not a watercolorist or you don't have Zig markers, I would recommend, if you have distress inks, not oxides, but distress inks, you certainly could use those for this technique. You don't have to be as precise with your coloring. Here I'm bringing in those browns. I have a dark brown and a mid-tone, and then I'll mix it up throughout some of the other leaves using just the darker brown. But you don't need to use Zig markers. You don't need to use Tombow markers. You don't need to use watercolors. Use what you have. If you have some ink like Catherine Pooler, or as I mentioned, the distress inks, those are perfect for this technique. And you might think, well, Marla, you know, I'm really not good at blending like you are, and every time that I do my watercoloring, it looks like a hot mess. Have no fear, because this is not the technique. The technique is coming up, and again, what you can do in place of what I'm doing here, because my card is going to change directions again, is simply just color in with one color if you want to. You don't have to use multiple colors on each of the leaves. You don't have to worry about washing out the color. If you just want to paint it a solid color, this technique is going to work perfectly. So I've added my browns. I'm going to come in with a red-orange combination just to add a little bit more pop to this. I think that the touch of orange still lends itself nicely to the color combinations that I've used. Using the same technique, nothing's changing here, and I think this is the last combination that I'm going to share. So you can see that technically I could put my sentiment in the center of this card. I could do the heat embossing and it would be pretty. But once I finished coloring this, I looked at it, and because of those leaves at the very bottom that are super big in that bare spot, I'm going to use some of the watercolor to fill in those areas. And when I do that, I don't know, there was something about it that it just wasn't feeling cohesive to me. It was feeling just a little bit blotchy, and I wasn't happy with my own watercoloring in those areas. So what I'm going to do is switch directions again on the card, because at this point I knew I was going to bring in a bigger sentiment to cover up that middle section. I'm going to spritz this with water. So this is going to move that ink. So even if you didn't do perfect watercoloring with a perfect blend, if you just lay that color down, look at that. Now you're going to get more of an abstract look. And the watercolor is going to pool. I was pretty generous with the water. I tilted my panel You could certainly use a paintbrush to move those colors, and look at how beautiful it is. They all melded together. They're all complementary of each other. And here's where I decided that I was going to use a larger sentiment. So I have a piece of vellum. This was the change of direction we just talked about. I cut it using my Tim Holtz guillotine trimmer. And then I am going to heat emboss a sentiment. This is the Psalm Reflections. I think it's the January mini stamp. Again, I've used my Versamark. The vellum is a very heavy vellum from Papertrey Ink, so I am going to be able to heat emboss on this. I've added that gold embossing powder. It's actually called Gilded, again from Brutus Monroe. I start by heating the panel from behind, and then I heat it from the front, and you can see just how beautiful that sentiment turned out. So it says, "This is the day that the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." I need to wrap this around this panel, so I'll start with my bone folder, and then I decide to switch to a stylus, and this is going to just give me some bend in that. It's going to allow me to bend that vellum nicely around my panel. I'll strategically add some glue behind some of the letters. I'm using a very, very small amount. Again, this is thicker vellum, so it doesn't show as bad if anything squeezes through. Obviously, you don't want big blobs, but it really dries pretty clear. I'll align it where I want it on my panel, and then I'll use my hand to kind of hold that down. Now, this is going to prevent any type of warping or your paper, your vellum sticking up. I really wanted my vellum to be secured to the front of my panel. I'll use some wet glue again to add to the corners that I need to glue down to the back of the panel, and then I want to add dimension with this foam tape. So this is 1/4 inch foam tape from scrapbook.com. I'll add 4 pieces. Remember, we've cut our panel down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, so we need a mat for this. And here I have some very inexpensive glitter paper. This is in a gold. This came from I think it's Reflections. It may be from Michael's. Very, very old. I have an A2 panel that's top folding, and I am going to add that on top. We are going to have a lot of sparkle on this card. So we have the embossing for the sentiment. We have the sparkle in the background. We have our leaves that have been heat embossed with that gold embossing. And when I place it over the top, I'm going to add a little bit of wet glue first, because I want to make sure that it adheres nicely to that glitter panel. Glitter panels can be a little bit finicky, so adding just a little bit of glue to the back of it is really going to help keep that secure and in place, so that when your recipient receives the card, it's not going to fall apart. But it was a little bit plain on the front, and I felt like it needed something more. So the Picket Fence stamp does have some loose leaves, and I am going to heat emboss those in gold. We still are using the Bristol Smooth cardstock and the Gilded embossing powder. Once I get that on, I was just not sure which side was the front. It was very hard to see. So once I get that on, I will heat set and melt that Gilded embossing powder. I'm going to stamp one more leaf, and I'll show you the stamping, but I don't actually show you the embossing. Use your imagination. It looks just the same as the other 2 leaves. And then I'm going to pull in a couple more Zig markers. So we are going to start with the red-orange combination, and I am going to be a little bit more intense with the coloring on this. So I've added a nice layer of the red and then the orange, and you're going to see that these are going to be a little bit more vibrant. And the vibrancy, because I didn't add that antique linen, it's not muting those colors. Now, there was a little section at the bottom of the stem of that leaf that I tried to color in, and as I was coloring it in, I went outside the lines. So I'm going to try to fix that with some water, but I'm going to move on to my next leaves, and we are going to go with a different color combination. I think this is red pink. And once I get the colors down and I wash it out with the brush, I realize that I don't want the two to be exactly the same. So I'm going to add, I believe, a little bit more pink to one of them just to change up the tones on the two leaves that are exactly the same. When I finish with this, I am going to spray the back with some pixie spray because I have a very old mat for my Brother Scan and Cut, and I'll run it through my Brother Scan and Cut using the 1/4 inch border to cut these out. And we'll have those nice 3 leaves, and I have some sequins. I believe this sequin mix came from a box of the month from the Not Too Shabby shop. It's a beautiful sequin combination. There's some golds and some purples, lots of jewel tones in this one. And I left the whole process of this in because I wanted to show you that we all change our minds. We all struggle with certain elements on a card. Right here, I know that I want those leaves to be in that orientation, but where I want them and how far I want them from the sentiment, I am going to move this several times. Finally, I'll pick it up and I'll add some glue to the back of it, and finally we have it in the space that we want. So on to our sequins. I don't know about you, but I struggle with sequin placement. I'm never sure if I'm using too many or too few. I always start with like 3 in one area and 3 in the other, and I didn't like the balance of that. So I am going to just kind of distribute these around my sentiment, and I will finally fall on a design that I like. And once I finish with that, I turned off the camera and I felt like I needed 2 more sequins. So I thought that I may have right here been adding too many. So that one in the bottom left-hand corner, and then there's another one that I'm going to add to the upper right. So I'm going to place this one in the middle. See, I'm just trying to figure out, do I have too many? Am I making this look too busy? I'll put this one in the middle, and that upper left-hand corner, I decide that I really do need another one. So off camera, I did add one up there. The sparkle on these sequins is beautiful. It goes with all the sparkle that's on the rest of the card, and that completes our card for today. So I hope you give this watercolor technique a try. It doesn't require a lot of skill, and look at how beautiful the cards turn out. Thank you so much for watching. I will have all of the products that I used linked in the description box below. Until next time, have a fabulous day. Thanks so much for watching.